My son set his fork down so hard it clicked against the plate. That's not true. Mom never agreed the house was basically yours. The sound cut through the chatter like a glass breaking, and for a half second nobody moved, not my sister-in-law with her serving spoon hovering over the casserole, not my father-in-law mid-laugh, not even the family friends at the end of the table who'd been nodding along to my husband's story. My husband's smile stayed on his face the way a sticker stays on a new pan, too neat, too shiny, almost proud of itself, while his eyes flicked to our son, then to me, then back to the room as if he could recalibrate the moment by force. We were at my sister-in-law's house for Sunday dinner, the kind of warm, crowded gathering where the kids drift in and out of the living room and the adults squeeze shoulder to shoulder, passing plates and finishing each other's sentences. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and sweet rolls, and someone had lit a candle that tried to cover the scent of the dog. My husband had been holding court for 10 minutes, telling one of those stories he always told when there were people to impress, how we found our place, how I handled the paperwork, how I fought for the best deal, how the realtor only talked to me because I'm the one who makes decisions. He said it with that casual swagger, like it was a funny little marriage quirk, like I was a lovable liability he'd rescued from my own incompetence. I'd been quiet, smiling when the room expected me to smile, taking sips of water I didn't need, trying to keep the evening smooth. I've learned that certain nights come with invisible rules. Don't contradict him in front of his family. Don't challenge him in front of people he wants to charm. Don't ask questions that make him feel cornered. But then he leaned back in his chair and said, with a laugh that invited everyone to laugh with him, I mean, let's be honest, this house is basically mine. I'm the one who made it happen. A couple of people chuckled automatically. My mother-in-law smiled in that tight, approving way she did when he sounded confident. And I felt the familiar heat rise up my neck, the mix of embarrassment and anger that I usually swallowed down because swallowing was easier than fighting. I was already reaching for my practiced response, something light like, oh, you know how he exaggerates, something that would keep the peace, when my son did what I hadn't. Fork click, chair shift. His voice clear and flat, not loud but loud enough because the table had gone silent. That's not true. Mom never agreed the house was basically yours. My husband's laugh stuttered. Then he tried to rescue it, turning it into a bigger laugh. A performance laugh. Buddy, he said, warm and patronizing. It's just an expression. He reached for his phone he always did when he needed a pause and placed it face down beside his plate, like he was putting a lid on the conversation. Your mom and I are a team, he added, looking around for backup. I'm just saying I handled the heavy lifting. I felt every eye swing to me, waiting for the wife line, the little joke that smooths the edges of the husband's ego. But my son didn't drop it. He wasn't even angry. He looked confused, like an adult had told a lie so obvious it didn't deserve strategy. You said it in the car, he continued, his gaze moving between my husband and my mother-in-law like he was trying to confirm reality. You said Mom can't tell you what to do with the house because it's your house. The air turned thick. Someone cleared their throat. My sister-in-law set the serving spoon down with a soft clink, her eyes widening like she'd just realized the dinner table was the wrong stage for this. My husband's expression tightened at the corners, the smile still there but now stretched. Okay, he said, too bright. That's enough. He reached out, not touching our son but hovering, a warning without contact. Kids don't need to repeat adult conversations. My mother-in-law's gaze hardened on my son, then softened on my husband, like she'd already decided who was being inappropriate. My father-in-law stared at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his potatoes. One of the friends gave me a sympathetic look and then looked away, as if sympathy itself was a breach of etiquette. I felt my stomach drop, not because of the awkwardness I could survive, but because my son's words landed somewhere deeper, like a door in my mind had cracked open. In the car. Adult conversations. It's your house. My husband always spoke in broad strokes, in jokes and expressions, but this wasn't a joke when it was said in private. I put my napkin down carefully, buying myself time, and I watched my husband's hand curl around the edge of his phone as if that small rectangle could anchor him. He heard something, I said, keeping my voice even, forcing it into calm. So what did you mean when you said that? My husband's eyes flashed quick, sharp, and then he pulled the warmth back over them like a curtain. I meant I'm responsible, he said. That I take care of us, that I don't want you stressed about paperwork. Everyone knows that, right? He looked around the table again, and I watched people respond the way people do when they can sense a storm. nodding, smiling, murmuring agreement, pretending the lightning didn't just hit the dinner table. My son stared at his plate, jaw tight, as if he couldn't understand why honesty had become rude. And I sat there in the quiet that followed, realizing something I hadn't let myself fully name before. My husband wasn't just telling a story. He was rehearsing a claim, out loud, in front of witnesses, and my child had been the one to pull the curtain back. My husband kept that smile glued on as if it could hold the whole room together, and for a few minutes it almost did. He made a show of reaching for the breadbasket, asked my brother-in-law about work, complimented my sister-in-law's cooking a little too loudly, and every time someone started to drift back into normal conversation, he nudged it along like a man steering a boat away from rocks. But the table had changed temperature. The laughter came slower, the questions sounded safer, and I could feel the way people were watching us without looking like they were watching us, quick glances that snapped away the second my eyes lifted. My son barely ate after that. He pushed peas around his plate, shoulders tight, and when my mother-in-law tried to hand him a roll and chirp, "Sweetie, don't be dramatic," he didn't answer. My husband's knee bumped mine under the table, not an accident, a little reminder of who controlled the room, and his hand slid over my thigh for a second like affection, but his fingers pressed just hard enough to say, "Don't." I swallowed the words that were stacked in my throat because I could see the consequences already forming. A scene, his family closing ranks, my son being labeled disrespectful, me being painted as the wife who lets her emotions ruin everything. Instead, I forced my own smile, the kind that makes your cheeks ache, and I heard myself say something neutral. Kids repeat things. Like that explained away the way my heart was pounding. My husband leaned into the opening, speaking as if he were helping everyone. "He's been anxious lately," he said, tone gentle and vaguely concerned, the exact tone that made him sound like the reasonable parent. "He mishears stuff. We're working on it." He said we like it was a shield. Then he reached over and ruffled our son's hair with a laugh, and our son flinched like he'd been touched by a stranger. I felt a flash of anger so sharp it made my vision blur, but I kept my face still because I'd learned the worst thing you can do with a person like my husband is react in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. He set his phone face down again when it buzzed, and I noticed it this time how quickly he shut the screen away, how fast his thumb moved, not typing, just tapping like he was clearing something. Across the table, my sister-in-law's eyes kept flicking between us, her mouth tight with that hostess panic, and she suddenly jumped up to offer dessert early, like sugar could overwrite what had happened. The rest of dinner became a choreography of pretending. My father-in-law asked about my son's school project. The friend at the end of the table commented on the weather, somebody mentioned a new restaurant, and everyone latched onto it like a life raft. I kept hearing my son's words echoing under the conversation. Mom never agreed, and each time my husband laughed, it sounded like someone closing a drawer too hard. When we finally stood to leave, the goodbyes were too polite. My mother-in-law kissed my husband's cheek and squeezed his arm, a silent vote. She brushed past me with a perfunctory hug that barely touched, then bent to my son and said, "Next time, we use inside thoughts," smiling as if she were teaching manners. My son didn't smile back. Outside, the night air hit my face like cold water, and my hands shook as I dug for my keys in my purse. My husband walked ahead of us, posture upright, still wearing the dinner party version of himself. He held the car door for my son with exaggerated kindness, then shut it with a little too much force. I slid into the passenger seat and clicked my seatbelt, the strap tightening across my chest like a brace. The ride home was quiet in the way silence becomes a weapon. The streetlights strobed through the windshield, slicing the darkness into bright strips, and each strip felt like an opportunity I wasn't taking. My son stared out the window, jaw set, and I could see his reflection in the glass older than he was, like he'd aged a year in an hour. My husband drove with both hands on the wheel, calm on the surface, and I watched the muscles in his forearm flex and release, as if he were squeezing down on something invisible. At a red light, he finally spoke, still using that smooth voice. "We don't embarrass family," he said, not looking at either of us. "Not like that." My son's fingers curled around the edge of his hoodie pocket. "You said it," he muttered. My husband exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath. "I said adult things," he replied. "You repeated them in a way that made your mom look—" He stopped, and the pause was loud. "Made the night awkward." That wasn't helpful. I turned slightly, staring at the passing storefront so I wouldn't have to look at his face. He repeated what he heard. I said carefully, "So maybe the question is why he heard it." My husband's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, and for a second, the car drifted toward the line before he corrected it. "Because you've been tense," he said, like he was diagnosing me. "He picks up on that, and he's looking for a villain. Kids do that." The light turned green, and he accelerated a little harder than necessary. My son went silent again, but I could feel his anger vibrating in the small space between us. When we pulled into our driveway, the garage keypad beeped, and the sound made my stomach twist, for reasons I didn't understand yet. My husband cut the engine and just sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, as if he was deciding which version of himself to bring inside. Then he turned his head to me. Smile. Gone now. Voice low. "We're not doing that again," he said. "Not in front of people." He glanced back at our son in the mirror. "And you no more correcting adults." My son's eyes lifted, and there was something in them that wasn't defiance so much as disbelief. I stepped out of the car, keys clenched so tightly they dug into my palm, and as I walked toward the front door, I realized the worst part wasn't the embarrassment, or the awkward dinner, or even his warning. It was the fact that my husband had told that story like he'd been practicing it, like he wanted the room to hear him claim the house as his, and my son had accidentally revealed the rehearsal had already been happening in private, where I couldn't contradict it. That night, after we got inside, my husband moved through the house like he owned the air in it. He kicked his shoes off neatly, asked our son if homework was done in a voice that sounded normal enough to fool anyone who hadn't just watched him tighten the leash in the car, and then he announced he was going to take a shower like the evening had been nothing but a slightly awkward dinner. My son hovered in the hallway for a moment, looking between me and the staircase as if he was waiting for instructions on how to exist. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly, and the question hit me harder than my husband's warning because it came from a place that still believed the truth should be safe. I crouched to his level and brushed his hair back. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told him. "You heard something and you said what you heard. That's not a crime." His eyes flicked toward the bathroom where the shower had started running. "He said you'd be mad at me," he whispered. "He said you get emotional." The way he said that word emotional, like it was a flaw, like it was proof of something, made my stomach twist. I wanted to say a dozen things, wanted to name the manipulation out loud, but I could already hear my husband's voice in my head. "We don't poison kids against parents." So I just took a breath and said, "Go upstairs, brush your teeth, I'll be there in a minute." When my son left, I stood in the kitchen with my keys still in my hand, the metal biting into my palm, and I listened to the water running upstairs, and the refrigerator humming, and the quiet settling into the corners of the house like dust. The garage keypad beep from earlier replayed in my head, one small, ordinary sound that suddenly felt like a warning. I forced myself to move, not because I had a plan, but because standing still felt like surrender. I opened the drawer where we kept the household papers, warranty booklets, appliance manuals, the kind of things you don't touch for months, and slid them aside. Nothing. Then I went to the small filing cabinet in the den where I kept the grown-up stuff. The things you tell yourself are organized so you can sleep at night. Insurance policies, tax returns, the mortgage paperwork from years ago. I pulled the bottom drawer open, and the smell of paper and old ink rose up. I had a system. I knew where everything was supposed to be. There was a folder for the house thicker than the rest, usually tucked behind the tax documents, a red folder that stuck out like a stop sign whenever I opened the drawer. And when I reached for it, my fingers closed on empty air. I stared at the gap for a full second, waiting for my brain to correct itself, like maybe I'd misremembered the color, the place, the weight. I slid the other folders forward, one by one. Insurance, school records, medical, a thin stack of coupons I'd shoved in there during the holidays. No red folder. My heart started to beat in my throat, and suddenly I remembered something from earlier in the evening. My husband's coat draped over the back of a chair at my sister-in-law's house, and the corner of a red folder peeking from the inside pocket like he'd brought it to dinner without thinking anyone would notice. At the time, I'd dismissed it work, paperwork, something boring. Now that memory sharpened, turned bright and cruel. I closed the cabinet slowly, as if closing it gently would make the missing thing reappear, then opened it again, like a superstitious person checking twice. Still gone. I heard the shower stop upstairs. panic flared, and I did what I've always done when panic flares. I made myself small and quiet. I went to the kitchen counter and picked up the pile of mail that had come today, flipping through it as casually as I could, as if I'd simply remembered a bill. There were envelopes already opened and tossed aside, ads, a credit card offer, a flyer. One white envelope had been slit cleanly along the top, the paper inside removed. My name was on the front in bold print, but the return address was from a company I didn't recognize. I looked for the contents, riffling through the stack again, then checked the trash. Nothing. The trash bag smelled like coffee grounds and chicken bones and something sour, and as I pushed aside the top layer, I saw shredded paper-thin strips, like someone had fed something through their hands. My throat tightened. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the bedroom floor. I froze. My husband appeared at the top of the stairs, towel around his waist, hair damp, face relaxed in a way that felt staged. His phone was in his hand, screen dark, and when he noticed me looking, he turned it over and set it on the hallway table face down, like punctuation. "You coming up?" he asked, voice neutral, almost kind. My chest felt too tight for speech, so I nodded and forced my feet to move. In our son's room, I helped with the bedtime routine on autopilot water cup, nightlight, the quick check under the bed that he didn't need anymore, but still asked for when things felt unstable. When I tucked him in, he grabbed my sleeve. "Mom," he said, barely a sound, "did he do something?" I paused, searching his face, and I hated that he was learning to ask that question. "I don't know yet," I answered, and it was the most honest thing I'd said all day. "But I'm going to find out." He nodded like he'd been waiting for that promise. In the hallway, my husband was already in bed when I entered our room, scrolling on his phone with the brightness turned low. He didn't look up as I changed into pajamas. "We're fine," he said, as if responding to a question I hadn't asked. "Don't spiral. Don't make this a thing." He set the phone down face down on his nightstand and reached for the lamp. "We've got enough stress without you digging for problems." The words landed with a cold familiarity. Digging for problems. As if questions were sabotage, as if wanting to see paperwork was hysteria. He turned off the light, and the room went dark except for the faint glow from the hallway nightlight. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing slow into the steady rhythm of someone who believed he'd won the day. Somewhere in the house, the thermostat clicked. The refrigerator hummed. The ordinary noises that used to mean safety now sounded like a cover, and in the darkness, with the empty space in my filing cabinet burning in my mind, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to understand at the dinner table. Whatever was happening wasn't just a story he told to impress people. It was a rearrangement of my life, happening quietly, folder by folder, envelope by envelope, and my son's correction had been the first time anyone had interrupted it out loud. Mourning didn't reset anything. It just made the house look too normal for what I was feeling. The sun came in through the kitchen blinds in clean stripes, lighting up crumbs on the counter and the faint smear on the stainless steel fridge, and for a moment I watched the coffee drip as if routine could steady me. My husband came downstairs already dressed, hair combed, the efficient version of himself he saved for workdays and witnesses. He kissed the top of our son's head like the night before had never happened, then glanced at me and gave a small, satisfied nod, like we'd completed a performance and he expected me to keep my lines. Our son ate cereal quietly, eyes down, and I could tell he was listening to everything without wanting to be seen listening. I waited until he carried his bowl to the sink and wandered toward the living room, turning the TV on low. Then I dried my hands on a towel that didn't need me to dry them and said, "We need to talk about what you said last night." My husband didn't look up from his phone. The screen was angled away from me, and I watched his thumb move in short taps like he was closing windows. He set it face down on the counter before he finally met my eyes. "About dinner?" he asked, voice mild, like I was bringing up a scheduling issue. I kept mine steady. "About the house." His expression barely changed, but something tightened behind it. "What about it?" he said. I reached for the simplest sentence I could find, the one that left no room for him to reroute the conversation into feelings and tone. "Show me the paperwork," I said. "Today. The deed, the title documents, everything." His lips pressed together, then curved into a little half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why?" he asked, as if the request itself was irrational. "Because our son says you told him it's your house, and I can't tell you what to do with it," I said. "And because the house folder is missing from the cabinet. That landed. I saw it in the brief flicker across his face, like a curtain tugged by a draft. Then the curtain dropped back into place. "You went through the files?" he said, and the emphasis wasn't on the missing folder, it was on the audacity of me looking. "I looked for the house papers," I corrected. "And they're not where they belong." He made a small sound, almost a laugh, and leaned his hip against the counter like he was settling in to explain something to a child. "You're spiraling," he said gently. "You do this. You hear one thing, you let it get under your skin, and suddenly it's some big conspiracy." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's not a conspiracy to ask for our deed," I said. "Show me." He lifted his hands in mock surrender. Okay, he said, still calm. "But not like this. Not first thing in the morning. I've got calls. I've got a schedule." He reached for his phone, checked it, and put it face down again, a deliberate gesture I couldn't stop noticing now. "We can look later," he added, "the way you say later when you mean never." I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay level. "No, not later. Today. Right now if you have it." In the living room, our son turned the TV down a notch without looking back, like he was trying not to eavesdrop while still needing to hear. My husband's eyes slid toward him for a second, then back to me, and his tone shifted, still quiet, but firmer, edged with warning. "Do not drag him into this," he said. "He already caused enough trouble last night." I stared at him. "He didn't cause trouble," I said. "He corrected you." The corner of my husband's mouth twitched, and I could tell he hated that word corrected because it implied he could be wrong in front of anyone, even a child. "He embarrassed us," he replied. "And you're feeding it by acting like this." I stepped closer to the filing cabinet in the den, as if standing near the empty space could keep me from backing down. "I'm not acting," I said. "Show me the deed." He sighed, a theatrical patient sigh, and walked past me to the cabinet like he was humoring a tantrum. He tugged a drawer open, rifled through folders with exaggerated slowness, then looked up with a shrug. "See?" he said. "It's not here. Maybe you moved it." The lie was so cleanly delivered that for a second my brain wanted to accept it, just to escape the pressure of realizing he could lie this easily. "I didn't," I said, "and I saw a red folder in your coat pocket last night." He froze for half a beat, just enough, and then his expression hardened in a way that made the room feel smaller. "So now you're watching me," he said, voice low. "You're tracking my pockets, going through trash, digging." He used that word like a weapon. "I'm asking for documents about our home," I said. "That's not digging. That's normal." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his aftershave and the coffee on his breath, and he lowered his voice even more. The private tone he used when he wanted to put me back in my place without anyone else catching it. "What's normal," he said, "is trusting your husband. What's not normal is turning one stupid comment into a full interrogation." He glanced toward the living room again, then back to me. "And I'm not doing this in front of him." "Fine," I said, refusing to be pulled off the point. "Then we'll do it after school. But I want the papers on the table. Not a story, not a joke. The documents." His eyes held mine for a long, cold second, and then he nodded once, like he was granting me a favor. "After school," he agreed, and I didn't miss the way he phrased it, like he still controlled the terms. He picked up his phone, checked the screen quickly, and slipped it into his pocket. "Now I'm leaving," he said, "and I want you to get it together before you make this worse." He walked toward the door with the kind of calm that comes from having already moved pieces on the board. When the door shut behind him, the house felt too quiet. Our son appeared in the doorway, face tight. "Is he going to show you?" he asked. I stared at the empty spot in the cabinet where the red folder should have been. "He says he will," I told him, and even as I said it, a cold thought settled into me like a stone. If he'd taken the folder once, he could take everything else that let me see the truth. And the first sign of that wasn't the missing papers, it was the way he'd turned my simple question into something I had to earn. After school, I timed everything like I was trying not to start a fire, pickup, snack, homework at the kitchen table, the kind of normal I could build with my hands while my mind kept circling the same question. My son talked less than usual, but he watched my husband's car pull into the driveway like he was tracking weather. When my husband walked in, he smiled at our son first, asked about school, dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, and kissed my cheek with the quick efficiency of a man clocking in for a role. "See?" his body language said. "We're fine." His phone buzzed once as he crossed the kitchen, and he turned it face down on the counter without checking it, like the notification didn't deserve light. I waited until our son carried his backpack into his room, the door half closed, the TV murmuring low. "You said after school," I reminded him, and I kept my voice even because I refused to hand him my tone as an excuse. He sighed like I'd made him late for something. "I did," he said, "but I'm not doing a whole courtroom performance." He opened the fridge, drank straight from the water pitcher, then set it down with a deliberate clink. "What exactly do you think you're going to find?" he asked. "A secret bunker? A hidden deed taped under the table?" The way he mocked it was meant to make me feel ridiculous, but my pulse stayed steady because the missing red folder was still missing, and mockery doesn't replace documents. "I'm going to find out what's true," I said. "So bring the papers." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at me as if he were deciding whether to punish me or placate me. "Fine," he said at last, and the words sounded like he was granting permission. "They're not here, okay? I took some things to scan. The folder's in my car. I'll grab it." He said it so casually I almost believed it, almost let relief in, until he added, "But you need to calm down with the kid. He doesn't need to see you like this." Like this, meaning awake, meaning noticing. He walked toward the garage door, and I followed, not hovering, not pleading, just moving with him like a person who had equal right to the space. The garage was dim and smelled like rubber and dust, and when he punched the keypad, the beep landed in my stomach again, a small electronic sound that suddenly felt connected to bigger locks. He popped the trunk, shuffled around in the back with exaggerated noise, and then stood up empty-handed. "Huh," he said, patting pockets like a man in a comedy sketch. "I must have brought it into the office." I stared at him. "You said it was in your car," I said. He shrugged. "Too easy." "I thought it was," he replied. "I'm not perfect. Things move. You act like I'm plotting." I didn't answer the bait. "Then we go get it," I said. "Or you email me scans tonight." He stepped closer, and the air shifted, the pleasant mask thinning. "I'm not driving back to the office because you've decided to panic," he said quietly. "I'll handle it. Like I always do." That phrase, "like I always do," slid over my skin like oil. I pictured the dinner table again. The way he'd said, "I handled the paperwork." The way people had laughed because they thought it was harmless. I thought of our son's face when he realized honesty had consequences. "I'm not asking you to handle it," I said. "I'm asking to see it." My husband's eyes narrowed, and for a second I saw the irritation underneath the charm. "You want to see paper," he said, "because you want control." He turned, snapped the trunk shut, and walked back inside like the conversation was over. As soon as we stepped into the kitchen, the doorbell camera chimed delivery, and my husband's head turned instantly, faster than mine. He moved to the front door before I could, opened it, and grabbed the mail and a small padded envelope from the porch like he'd been waiting for it. "Just junk," he said, already sorting. I watched him flip through, and my throat tightened because he was not sorting like someone tossing ads. He was scanning return addresses with purpose. One envelope had my name printed cleanly across the front. I saw it, clear as daylight, before his thumb slid over it. He tucked it under the padded envelope and angled both toward his chest. "I'll go through this," he said, still casual. "You hate mail. Give me my mail," I said, and the sentence felt strange coming out of me, simple, basic, a boundary I shouldn't have to draw. He paused, then smiled like I'd told a joke. "Seriously?" he said. "Right now?" I held my hand out. He stared at my open palm for a beat, then laughed softly and handed me 2 obvious flyers and a catalog, keeping the rest. "There," he said. "Happy?" I kept my hand out, unmoving. "All of it," I repeated. His smile thinned. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. "A power play?" "No," I said. "It's my name." Something flickered behind his eyes, and then he leaned in with a tone that sounded reasonable but felt like a threat. "Do you want to do this in front of him?" he murmured, glancing toward our son's room. My son's door was still half closed, but I could hear the TV muted again, like he was listening. My husband had learned how to use that, how to make me choose between a boundary and my child's peace. I took a breath and stepped closer anyway. "Hand it over," I said, quieter, but not softer. He exhaled, long and annoyed, then slid the stack into my hand like he was humoring me. I flipped through immediately. Ads, coupons, a statement-looking envelope that had already been slit open along the top. My stomach dropped. "Why is this opened?" I asked. "Because I opened it," he said, as if the question was absurd. "It came by mistake. It's nothing." I pulled the envelope fully open and found it empty. "Where's the paper?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "I threw it out," he replied. "It was nonsense. Stop making everything dramatic." Behind him on the counter, his phone buzzed again, one sharp vibration, and he moved fast, scooping it up and turning the screen away from me, thumb-tapping like he was dismissing something. But I caught a glimpse, just enough. A security-style banner, words too quick to read, the shape of an alert that didn't look like a text from a friend. When he set it down face down again, my skin went cold. I walked to my own phone, opened my email, and refreshed with shaking fingers, telling myself I was being paranoid, while another part of me counted the missing pieces. The red folder, the empty envelope, the shredded strips in the trash, his practice story in front of witnesses. A new email loaded at the top of my inbox, subject line in bold, "Your account settings have been updated." My breath caught. Then another, "Paperless statements enabled." Then a third, "Mailing address change confirmed." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, and when I looked up, my husband was watching me too calmly, like he'd been waiting for the moment I found out. "What did you do?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange, thin with disbelief. He lifted one shoulder, a small shrug that tried to turn my fear into a misunderstanding. "I streamlined things," he said. "You're always losing papers. This is better." I looked toward my son's door, toward the quiet he was forcing on himself, and I realized the fight wasn't going to be a loud explosion in the kitchen. It was going to be a series of small doors, closing folders, disappearing, mail rerouted, accounts reconfigured, until I couldn't prove what I already knew in my bones. I held my phone tighter and made myself speak like a person who would not be moved. "Undo it," I said. "Tonight." My husband's smile returned, slow and controlled. "Or what?" he asked, almost gently, and the question hung there like a lock clicking into place. I didn't answer him in the kitchen, because the answer he was fishing for wasn't a solution, it was a reaction he could label. I swallowed the urge to argue, and instead felt something colder settle in, a focus I hadn't had in a long time. "We'll talk later," I said, and the way his eyes narrowed told me he heard the shift even if he didn't understand it yet. He drifted toward our son's room with that rehearsed tenderness, asking about homework, offering to help, the kind of help that was really surveillance. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to wipe the counter, watching his phone every time it buzzed, and he flipped it face down again, like the light itself was dangerous. When our son finally emerged to brush his teeth, he met my eyes for half a second, an anxious check-in, and I gave him the smallest nod I could, a promise without words. After bedtime, my husband planted himself on the couch and turned on a game, volume loud enough to fill the house, like noise could drown out consequences. "Don't stay up spiraling," he called without looking at me, and I heard the faint amusement in it, the confidence of someone who thought he'd closed all the doors already. I waited until he was distracted, then carried my laptop into the bedroom and shut the door just enough to look normal. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I sat at the edge of the bed, opened the laptop, and for a second my hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking with a mix of anger and fear that wanted to turn into tears. I didn't let it. I told myself one thing over and over: paper doesn't care how charming someone is. I started where truth is supposed to live: public records, boring websites, the places that don't take sides. I typed in our county's property search portal, the assessor page I'd used years ago to check tax due dates. The site looked like it was built in 2009. Gray buttons, tiny fonts, the kind of government interface that makes you feel like you're doing something you're not supposed to understand. I entered our address, hit search, and waited. A line of results popped up, and my stomach clenched even before I clicked because the record was there, neat and official, like the house had always belonged to data: parcel number, land value, improvement value, last sale date. And then, in the owner field, a name. His name, not ours, not my name anywhere near it. Just his full legal name in black text, followed by a mailing address that wasn't our home. My breath stopped. I stared so hard my eyes burned, reading it again and again as if repetition would change the letters. The mailing address was a P.O. box in a nearby town, 2 towns over, the same kind of distance that makes something accessible but hidden, like a secret kept close enough to retrieve quickly. I clicked into the details, scrolled through the tabs, owner information, tax billing, history. Everything looked clean, standardized, emotionless. I felt my pulse in my ears, heard my husband's voice from the living room laughing at something on TV, and the contrast made me nauseous. I took a screenshot, then another, with the parcel number visible. Then I used my phone to take a photo of the screen too, because some part of me didn't trust anything digital anymore. I clicked print and stopped myself at the last second, imagining the printer whirring downstairs, spitting out proof like a siren. Instead, I saved it as a PDF to a folder on my desktop with a stupid, neutral name, School Forms, because I'd learned that obvious labels are invitations. My hands moved faster now, driven by the terrible clarity that comes when you realize you've been living inside someone else's version of reality. I opened the tax billing tab, looking for dates, for changes, for anything that would tell me when this had happened. The billing status showed paperless, and the email listed wasn't mine. It was a masked address I didn't recognize, like someone had put a filter over the truth. I clicked back to my inbox and reread the alerts from earlier. Paperless enabled, mailing address updated. My husband had said he was streamlining. Streamlining was a pretty word for cutting me out of the flow of information. I tried logging into our mortgage account, and the site took longer than usual, loading in pieces, the spinning circle making my skin prickle. The login worked barely, but the contact section looked different, and when I clicked notifications, my phone buzzed with another email. Alert preferences updated. I hadn't touched alert preferences. I closed the tab like it was hot and opened my bank app, because if he was moving paperwork, he was moving money too. Another security banner flashed. New device sign-in detected. Location, a nearby town. I stared at it until the words made sense. 2 towns over. P.O. Boxtown. My mouth went dry. In the living room, the TV volume rose, then dipped, and I could hear the soft scrape of a fork against a plate my husband snacking, casual, unbothered, while my world rearranged itself in quiet clicks and updates. I thought of my son's fork at dinner, the sharp click that had stopped the table. The truth had made a sound then. Now it was making a different kind of sound, the silent, administrative locking of doors. I copied the county portal link into my notes, wrote down the parcel number, the mailing address, the exact owner line, and then I emailed the screenshots to a brand new email account I created on the spot. One my husband didn't know existed, because I suddenly understood that evidence you keep inside the house can disappear the way folders disappear. When I finally closed the laptop, my hands were steady in a way they hadn't been all day. I didn't feel calm. Not really. I felt awake. I opened the bedroom door and listened. The TV was still on. My husband was still out there, confident, laughing. I stepped into the hallway and looked at our son's door, light off, quiet behind it, and I made myself a promise that felt as solid as the screenshot sitting in my new inbox. If my husband wanted to claim the house in front of everyone, then I was going to meet him where claims are real on record, on paper, in places where charm doesn't get to vote. The next morning I didn't wake him with anger. I woke him with facts. I waited until our son was on the bus, until the house had that hollow quiet that makes secrets louder, and then I set my phone on the kitchen table with the county portal screenshot already open, parcel number, owner line, mailing address, everything crisp and undeniable. My husband came in like he owned the morning, coffee mug in hand, tie half done, and he stopped when he saw my posture. "What now?" he said, not a question so much as a warning. I slid the phone across the table without a word. He glanced down, and I watched his eyes move the way a person's eyes move when they recognize something they hoped you'd never see. For half a second, there was a tightening at the jaw, a flicker of calculation, and then he smoothed his face into mild confusion. "What is this?" he asked, as if I'd shown him a random meme. "The county property record," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, almost flat. "It lists you as the only owner. And the tax mailing address is a P.O. box in Brookhaven." I said the town out loud on purpose, anchoring it in the air. He let out a small laugh, the kind designed to make a woman feel silly for believing her own eyes. "Oh my God," he said, shaking his head like I'd fallen for a scam. "Those sites are wrong all the time. That's not a record. That's an assessor display. You're confusing things." Confusing. There it was, the pivot he always used when I cornered him with anything solid. I didn't argue about the word, I just moved to the next fact. "Then show me the deed," I said. Show me the closing packet. Show me anything with my name on it. He took a sip of coffee slowly, buying time, and set the mug down with controlled precision. Then he reached for my phone and flipped it face down, a gesture so automatic it made my skin crawl. "First," he said, "you don't ambush me like this in the morning." He looked at me as if he were the adult in the room and I was a teenager who'd stayed out past curfew. "Second, you don't go digging in county websites and acting like you're some investigator. It's unhealthy." "Unhealthy," I repeated, not as a question, but because I wanted him to hear how ridiculous it sounded next to the owner line he'd just seen. He pushed his chair back and stood. "This is exactly what I mean," he said, walking toward the den. "You get fixated. You start spiraling. And then you create drama that impacts our kid." He tossed that last part like a net, hoping it would catch me the way it usually did. I followed him, not fast, not pleading, just present. "Our kid already heard you say it was basically yours," I said. "So don't act like I'm inventing something." His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. He opened the filing cabinet drawer and made a show of rummaging, louder than necessary, paper sliding, folders thumping like props in a play. "See?" he said, holding up a random stack insurance, old tax documents, nothing house-related. "There's nothing to show you because you're looking in the wrong places, and I told you, the folder's at the office." "Then bring it home," I said. "Today." He slammed the drawer shut not violently, but with a decisive finality that made the room jump. "I will," he said, "when I have time, not on your schedule." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped into that low, private register that always made me feel like the walls themselves were on his side. "And you're going to stop talking about this where he can hear. Do you understand me?" The way he said understand wasn't about comprehension, it was about compliance. "He's not here," I said, "so we can talk." My husband's eyes were calm in a way that felt wrong, like a person who already had a second plan in motion. "We're not talking," he replied, "because there's nothing to talk about. The house is handled, the finances are handled, and you need to stop treating me like an enemy." He said enemy, like I'd accused him of something outrageous, like I hadn't just watched him intercept mail and change settings in my name. I took a breath and made my words simple again, because simple is harder to twist. "Remove the paperless setting," I said. "Put my email and number back on the accounts. Put the mail address back to our home. Today." He stared at me for a beat, then smiled a slow, tight smile that carried no warmth. "Why?" he asked. "So you can monitor everything? So you can get notifications and work yourself into a panic at 2 in the morning?" He shook his head like he was mourning my instability. "No, I did that for a reason." "For what reason?" I asked. He walked past me into the kitchen, grabbed his phone, and for the first time he didn't flip it face down. He held it upright like a badge. "Because you can't handle information without turning it into a crisis," he said. "And I'm done letting your anxiety run this house." Then he did something that made my stomach go cold. He opened his settings, tapped a few times, and said, "Also, I'm changing the Wi-Fi password today. You've been on those sites all night. It's not healthy." It was such a small thing, Wi-Fi, a password, but the meaning of it hit me like a shove. This wasn't about the internet. It was about access, about deciding what I could see and when. "You're going to lock me out of the Wi-Fi," I said, and my voice finally cracked. Not with tears, but with disbelief at how easily he could call control. "Help," he shrugged, casual. "You can have it," he said. "When you calm down." The rule shift was immediate. My rights were now privileges he could dole out as rewards for good behavior. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides, nails pressing into my palms the way the keys had the night before. "I have screenshots," I said. "I have the parcel number. I have the owner line. You can't calm down me out of that." His eyes flicked just once to the drawer where he kept spare keys and small tools. Then back to me. "Screenshots are not legal documents," he said smoothly. "They're images you saved because you were upset. If you start waving those around, you're going to look unstable." He said it like advice, like he cared, and that was the most vicious part. He was already drafting the story he'd tell about me if I pushed too hard. I stood there, feeling the house around us, the cabinets, the counters, the walls we'd painted together suddenly less like a home and more like a stage he'd been rearranging behind my back. And in that moment I understood the real fight wasn't just about a deed or a folder. It was about who got to define reality in this family. He'd been defining it out loud at dinner, privately in the car, administratively through email alerts, and now, right in my kitchen, with my phone face down and my access treated like a privilege, he was trying to define it again. I wasn't uncovering theft. I was confused. I wasn't asking for my rights. I was spiraling. I didn't move away from him. I didn't soften. I simply picked up my phone, turned the screen back toward me, and said, "Then we're getting the legal documents." And for the first time, his smile didn't come back right away. By noon, I'd made 3 calls from my car, parked 2 blocks away from our son's school, like the distance could keep my voice from shaking. The county office number sent me through a recording and 2 transfers before a clerk finally answered in a tired, practical tone that didn't care about my marriage. I gave her our address and asked what documents were on file, what owner meant, what I could request. She didn't offer comfort, she offered procedure. "If you want the recorded instrument," she said, "you can request a copy. If there was a change, there will be an instrument number and a recording date." Instrument, recording, date. Words that sounded like a different world than dinner tables and face-down phones. I wrote everything down in my notes app. The parcel number, the mailing address, the office hours, the fee per page. Then I called the title company listed on an old email from when we bought the house, half expecting it to be disconnected or changed. A receptionist answered, bright and professional, and when I said my name and our property address, she paused in a way that told me the file existed and it had weight. "Let me see," she said, keys clacking. "Are you calling about the file from—" She named the year we bought, then hesitated. "Or the more recent activity?" My stomach turned. "Recent activity?" I said, and she lowered her voice without me asking, as if the word recent made her cautious. She told me I could speak with a closing coordinator, but only if I came in with ID, only if I was on the file, only if the request matched their records. The rules were polite, tight, and suddenly I understood why my husband loved paperwork. It obeyed whoever got there first. When I hung up, I sat in the car and stared at the steering wheel until the texture of it came into focus. I could hear my husband's voice from the morning. Screenshots aren't legal documents like he'd tried to pull the ladder up behind him. Fine, I would get legal documents. I picked up our son, kept my face calm, asked about spelling tests and cafeteria drama, nodded at the teacher like my life wasn't quietly being rerouted. At home, I made snacks, supervised homework, answered a text from my sister-in-law that said, "Everything okay? Last night was weird, lol." And I typed back, "All good, just tired," because I wasn't ready to hand my husband another room full of witnesses he could charm. When my husband got home, he was in a strange, buoyant mood, too light, too pleasant the way he got when he'd already decided the outcome of something. "You look better," he said, as if I'd been sick and he'd cured me by scolding me. He set his phone on the counter face down out of habit, then turned it upright again, checked it quickly, and flipped it back down like he'd remembered the part he was supposed to hide. "We have a meeting tomorrow," he said, casual, "about the house." The way he said it like he'd planned it, like he'd done me a favor, made my skin prickle. "What meeting?" I asked. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin stack of papers, not the thick red folder I remembered, but a neat, clipped set like something you bring to a conference. "HOA," he said, and smiled. "They're updating records. It's routine. They just need us to confirm some stuff." He slid the papers across the counter toward me with a pen already resting on top, the universal gesture for "just sign here." The first page had our address, bold at the top. Below it were checkboxes and lines and language that blurred when I tried to read too fast. "I already talked to them," he added, "because I don't want the neighborhood thinking we're disorganized. And the realtor who helped us before, she's going to be there too. She said it's easy." The mention of a realtor felt like a hook. Realtors weren't about feelings. They were about transactions. "Why is a realtor involved?" I asked. My husband's smile stayed in place, but his eyes sharpened. "Because I asked for professional help," he said, as if that was responsible, as if I was unreasonable for wanting clarity. "You wanted documents. Here are documents. Sign and we can move on." I didn't touch the pen. I read the top line again, slower, forcing my brain not to skim. One sentence jumped out: authorization to update ownership contact and mailing information. Another: acknowledgement of primary owner for association records. My throat went dry. "These aren't HOA forms," I said quietly. "These are ownership and contact changes." My husband's posture shifted just a fraction, and his voice turned coaxing. "It's the same thing," he said. "HOA needs the owner contact. You're making it weird." "I'm reading," I replied. He laughed once, sharp. "You're acting like I'm trying to trick you," he said, and he glanced toward our son's room the way he always did when he wanted to remind me there was an audience I cared about. Our son's door was open a crack, TV low, and I could feel him listening again, not because he wanted drama, but because he wanted the ground to stop moving under him. I slid the papers back toward my husband without signing. "No," I said. The word felt heavy and clean. My husband's smile dropped for a second, then he put it back on like a mask. "Okay," he said, too calm. "Then we do it the hard way." He tapped his phone. Screen angled away from me, and I heard him say, "Yes, tomorrow at 10 is fine," into the air like he was confirming something already scheduled. Then he looked at me and said, "We're going to the title office." He said it like a threat disguised as a solution. "Good," I said, and he blinked, not expecting agreement. "Good," I repeated, louder, so he couldn't pretend he'd misheard. "Because I'm not signing anything until I see what's on record." His jaw tightened. "You're going to embarrass yourself," he murmured. "You're going to walk in there and look hysterical. And they'll think you're unstable." The word unstable made my stomach clench, because I could hear the story he'd tell about me if anyone asked. But the plan he'd just announced title office was exactly where my screenshots could become paper. "I'm not unstable," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm informed." He stared at me, then picked up the thin stack again and tucked it under his arm like he still owned the narrative. "Fine," he said. "Tomorrow. And when they tell you you're wrong, you're going to apologize for all of this." That night he was unusually attentive with our son, helping with math, asking about a classmate, laughing a little too much like he needed our son to forget the fork click at dinner. When bedtime came, my son lingered in the hallway and whispered, "Mom, are you going to sign something?" I crouched and met his eyes. "No," I said. "Not unless I understand it." He nodded slowly, relief and fear tangled together. In our room, my husband turned off the lamp without asking, rolled over, and said into the dark, "Don't make a scene tomorrow." I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breathing settle, and I thought about the receptionist's pause recent activity and the clerk's word instrument and the pen waiting on top of the papers like a trap. Tomorrow wasn't just an appointment. It was my husband trying to box me in with professionalism and witnesses, betting that I'd choose politeness over protection the same way I always had. The next morning my husband drove like he was taking us to prove a point, hands relaxed on the wheel, radio low, the kind of calm that felt rehearsed. He parked right in front of the title company like he wanted to be seen arriving, then held the door for me with a smile that looked polite to strangers and controlling to anyone who knew the difference. Inside, the office smelled like toner and lemon cleaner, and the waiting area was arranged to make people whisper soft chairs, a water dispenser, a rack of brochures that all promised peace of mind in bold fonts. A young couple sat across from us, holding hands and looking nervous in the hopeful way people look before they sign their future. A notary at a side desk stamped papers with an efficient rhythm, thump, slide, thump, that made my pulse match it. My husband checked in with the receptionist using his confident voice, the one that turns paperwork into a social performance. He said our address like it was his, spelled his name without stumbling, joked about keeping the wife from Googling herself into a panic, and I watched the receptionist laugh politely while her eyes flicked to me for confirmation. I didn't smile. I kept my phone in my hand, screen dim, county portal screenshot ready like a weapon I hoped I wouldn't have to swing. The receptionist nodded, typed, then said, "Someone will be with you shortly." And as we sat down, my husband leaned close and murmured, "Just follow my lead." I looked at him and said quietly, "No, I'm following the record." His jaw tightened, but he didn't push it. He was saving his pressure for an audience. A woman in her 40s with a tidy bun and a lanyard came out and called my husband's name first, not mine, and my husband stood immediately like he'd been invited to a stage. "That's us," he said, and I stood too, matching him step for step. She led us into a small conference room with a glass wall facing the hallway, the kind of transparency that still feels like a cage because everyone can see you but no one can hear you. There was a thin stack of papers on the table already, clipped at the corner, and a pen placed on top as if the story had one inevitable ending. My husband sat at the head of the table without thinking, then gestured for me to sit beside him like an accessory. The coordinator introduced herself and began in a tone that was all procedure. "I understand there are questions about ownership records," she said, eyes moving between us. My husband laughed lightly. "There are," he replied, then glanced at me. She got herself upset. The coordinator's expression stayed neutral, but her gaze sharpened in the way professionals do when they hear a spouse translate conflict into a personality flaw. I slid my phone across the table, screen up, and said, "This is what I pulled from the county portal. It lists him as sole owner and uses a P.O. box for tax mailing. I want the recorded instrument and the chain of title." Saying chain of title out loud felt surreal, like speaking a language I'd learned in one night, but the coordinator nodded as if it were normal, which steadied me. My husband's hand moved automatically toward the phone to flip it face down, then stopped himself, catching the gesture at the last second because someone else was watching. That tiny pause told me everything. He could control me in private, but he had to perform restraint in public. The coordinator looked at the screenshot, then typed on her laptop. The click of keys sounded like a clock counting down. My husband leaned back, arms crossed, wearing patience like armor. "These sites are inaccurate," he said, "and she doesn't understand what she's reading." The coordinator didn't respond to that. Instead, she said, "I can tell you what we have in our system," and then, after another long minute of typing, her voice shifted slightly, still professional, but more careful. "There is a recorded instrument associated with this property within the last year," she said. My stomach dropped, hard. My husband's smile stayed in place, but his eyes flicked to the pen on the stack like he wanted to grab it and finish whatever this was before it became worse. "Right," he said quickly. "That's what I told her. Routine." The coordinator held up a hand, gentle but firm. "I'm going to need to confirm who is authorized to receive copies," she said, and she turned her laptop slightly so I could see the screen. A file overview with names and dates blurred by distance but undeniably real. "If you're requesting the recorded deed copy," she added, "that's a public record and can be obtained through the county. If you're requesting our internal closing packet, we have privacy rules." My husband pounced on that. "See?" he said to me, voice sweet. "Privacy rules. This is what I mean. You're making yourself crazy." I looked at the coordinator and said, "I'm not asking for his privacy. I'm asking for the recorded instrument number and recording date so I can request the copy from the county. And I want to know why the tax mailing address is not our home." The coordinator's gaze flicked to my wedding ring, then to my name, as I slid my ID across the table. "I can provide the instrument number," she said slowly, "and the recording date, because that corresponds to a recorded document. The mailing address change is typically done through the assessor or by whoever submitted the update." Whoever submitted. My husband's foot tapped once under the table, a tiny, involuntary tell. "Can you tell me the submitting party?" I asked. The coordinator typed again, then said, "The record indicates it was requested by—" She paused, like she didn't want to inflame the room, "by your husband." The air in the glass room turned thick. My husband's laugh came out too fast. "Requested," he repeated, as if the word was harmless. "That doesn't mean what she thinks it means. It means you initiated it," I said, keeping my voice level. The coordinator set a small notepad on the table and wrote down the instrument number and date in neat, careful digits, then tore off the page and slid it to me like contraband. My hands trembled as I took it, not because I was weak, but because the truth was becoming portable. My husband leaned forward, voice dropping into that private tone even though we were in public. "Don't," he murmured. "You're going to embarrass yourself." I looked at him and said quietly, "You've been embarrassing me in paperwork for months." In the hallway outside the glass, the young couple stood to leave, smiling nervously, and the notary's stamp kept thumping like punctuation to my life. The coordinator cleared her throat and said, "If there's a dispute about ownership, you may want to consult an attorney." And my husband immediately straightened, offended at the implication. "There is no dispute," he said sharply, then softened it into a smile for her benefit. "This is just miscommunication." I stood, folding the notepad page and slipping it into my wallet the way my son had slipped truth into the air at dinner. Small, direct, impossible to pretend didn't happen. As we walked out, my husband reached for my elbow. Not quite a grip, but a claim, and I realized he'd brought me here expecting the office to back him up with rules and politeness. Instead, he'd handed me the next breadcrumb, an instrument number, a date, a path to the actual recorded deed. In the car, he didn't turn on the radio. He didn't speak until we were halfway home. Then he said, voice calm in a way that promised punishment later, "You got what you wanted. Now you stop." I stared out the window at the ordinary streets, the kids on bikes, the mailboxes like small mouths waiting to be fed, and I thought about the coordinator sliding that number to me like a lifeline. "No," I said, and the word didn't shake. I got a lead. Now I get the document. I didn't tell my husband where I was going the next morning. I just did what I'd learned to do around him. I moved quietly, with purpose, and without giving him a handle to grab. After dropping our son off, I drove straight to the county recorder's office with the instrument number folded inside my wallet like it was something fragile. The building was the kind of place that smells like old carpet and printer ink, with fluorescent lights that make everyone look slightly guilty. I took a number, sat between a man arguing with a parking ticket and a woman holding a manila envelope like a shield, and I watched the digital display tick forward one red number at a time. When my turn came, I slid the slip of paper across the counter and said, "I need a copy of the recorded instrument for this number." And the clerk didn't blink, just typed, clicked, and asked for a fee in a voice that suggested this was the most ordinary form of heartbreak she'd see all day. I paid, signed a request form, and waited while a printer somewhere behind the wall woke up with a mechanical whir that sounded, to my ears, like a door unlocking. The clerk returned with a stapled packet, pages warm from the machine, the top page stamped with a recording seal, and a date that made my stomach drop. It wasn't years ago when we bought the house. It was recent, close enough to last summer that I could remember what we were doing that week. Close enough that I could remember my husband telling me he had extra meetings and coming home with a cheerful tiredness that didn't match his calendar. I stepped aside to a small counter near the exit and read it like a person reading a diagnosis. There it was, the legal description of our property, the instrument type, the grantor and grantee lines that looked clinical until you understand what they mean. The grantee line listed my husband, and then, in the same breath of ink, it listed a trust tied to his mother. Not me. Not husband and wife. Not anything that resembled the life I'd been living inside those walls. My name was absent in a way that felt loud. My hands went cold and then hot, like my body couldn't decide whether to run or fight. I flipped to the signature page, and the shock sharpened. A signature that looked like mine at a quick glance, but wasn't mine when you actually know your own hand. Wrong slant, wrong pressure, the loops too tight, the letters too careful, like someone copying from memory. Beneath it was a notary stamp with a date and time, and the notary's commission number printed in clean type, as if that made everything respectable. I read the notary date again, because it landed in a memory. That was the day my husband had insisted I stay home with our son because he had to run errands. That was the day he'd brought home takeout like an apology. That was the day I'd been grateful he was handling stuff. I wanted to throw up. I didn't. I pulled my phone out, took photos of every page, then asked the clerk for a certified copy because a plain copy felt too easy to dismiss. When she clipped a certification page on top and pressed a seal that left an indented mark in the paper, I felt something shift in me, not relief, not peace, but a hard, undeniable weight. This was real, and it didn't care how politely my husband smiled. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a security alert, new login attempt, followed by an email about notification preferences updated, like someone was still trying to move pieces while I was holding the board. I didn't even have to guess who. By the time I got back to my car, I had another message from our mortgage portal. Authorized user removed. My breath caught, and for a second I just stared at the screen, because the timing was too precise to be coincidence. He was tightening access as I gained evidence. I drove home with the document packet on the passenger seat like a passenger itself, something I had to keep an eye on, and when I walked into the house, I went straight to my own closet and tucked it inside a tote bag under winter scarves because I no longer trusted drawers. I was halfway through making coffee when my husband's car pulled into the driveway early, too early, and I heard the garage keypad beep like a warning bell. He walked in with his work face on, smiling too quickly, as if he'd heard through some channel that I'd moved. "Morning," he said, and his eyes flicked automatically to the counter, searching for signs, my laptop, my phone, a printout, anything he could flip face down to reassert control. When he didn't see anything, his smile tightened. "You're quiet," he observed. "I'm busy," I said. And it wasn't a lie. He set his phone face down on the counter out of habit, then stopped, lifted it, and slid it into his pocket instead, like he'd realized the gesture was telling on him. "We're done with the county obsession," he said lightly, trying to keep it playful. "I told you those sites make you crazy." I didn't answer. I walked to the tote bag, pulled out the certified packet, and set it on the kitchen table with a soft thud that felt like the opposite of my son's fork. Click, less sound, more finality. My husband's eyes dropped to the stamp first, then to the names, and I watched the moment his rehearsed calm failed him. He didn't laugh this time. He didn't call me confused. He didn't say I was spiraling. His jaw clenched, and the color drained from his face in a slow wave that was almost satisfying if it hadn't been my life. "Where did you get that?" he said, voice low. "County recorder," I replied. "Instrument number. Recording date. Certified copy. The deed." I flipped to the page with the grantee line and tapped it once with my finger. Not hard, just precise. "Explain why your mother's trust is on my house." His mouth opened, then closed, and the pause was a confession. He tried to recover with anger. "You went behind my back," but the words fell flat against the seal, the stamp, the date. I turned to the signature page and slid it toward him. "And explain this," I said, "because that isn't my signature." The air between us felt like glass about to crack. He stared at it, then looked up at me with a new calculation, less charm, more damage control. "You don't understand," he began, and I cut him off with the calmest sentence I'd ever said to him. "I understand enough," I replied. "And now you're going to tell me the truth, or you're going to tell it in front of someone who can put it on record." The lawyer didn't look impressed by the drama. She looked impressed by paper. She spread the certified deed copy across her desk, ran a finger over the recording seal, then turned to the signature page and went still in a way that made my throat tighten. "This is either a forged signature or a signed document you don't remember signing," she said, careful with her words, "and either way it needs to be handled procedurally." Procedurally became my lifeline. In the days that followed, my husband tried every version of the same move. Charm, then anger, then pity, then blame. He texted me things like, "We can fix this privately, and you're going to destroy our family over a misunderstanding." And when I didn't respond the way he wanted, he switched to, "If you take this public, you'll regret it." I stopped sleeping with my phone on the nightstand because every buzz felt like him reaching into my head. I created a new folder in a new email account and forwarded everything there: security alerts, paperless confirmations, address changes, the mortgage message that said authorized user removed, and then, like a cruel punchline, a mortgage portal notification about a payoff request. Payoff statement requested by his name. Good through date in a week. The paper trail wasn't just about ownership. It was about making me irrelevant. My lawyer asked for specific items, not feelings. The county certified deed, the notary stamp details, any proof of account changes, and anything tying money movement to the title change. The day we went to the courthouse, my stomach felt hollow, like my body knew this was the kind of public room my husband had been rehearsing for, only he'd imagined himself winning. The hallway smelled like bleach and damp paper. People sat on benches with manila folders and tired eyes, waiting to have their lives called out by case number. A clerk behind glass slid forms through a slot, never looking up long enough to absorb anyone's story. My husband arrived in a suit I'd seen him wear to weddings, the one that made him look trustworthy at a distance. He brought his mother. That detail was both predictable and nauseating. Another witness, another layer of pressure. He smiled at me like we were colleagues, not opponents, and he leaned in as if to speak softly, the way he always did when he wanted the moment to belong to him. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "We can walk out right now and handle it like adults." I looked past him at the courtroom doors and said, "We are handling it like adults. Here." His mother's eyes narrowed, and I could almost hear her thinking, "How dare you?" My son was at school. I refused to make him a spectator to this. But I carried his fork click inside me anyway, the moment the truth made a sound in front of witnesses. When our case was called, we filed in. The room was smaller than I expected, plain and harsh under fluorescent lights, the kind of space that doesn't care who you are outside it. The judge sat elevated, expression neutral, and the clerk's voice was brisk as she recorded names. My husband started with his calm story voice, the one he used at family dinners. "This is all a misunderstanding. My wife is emotional. She got confused by an assessor website. The property was always handled by me." he said, handled like it was responsible, like it was a virtue. Then he glanced toward his mother, as if her presence automatically validated him. My lawyer didn't argue with his adjectives. She placed documents. She handed the clerk a packet, and the clerk walked it up to the bench. I watched the judge's eyes move across the certified deed copy, pause at the recording date, then land on the grantee line. Husband plus mother's trust. The judge's expression didn't change dramatically, but the air did. My husband's smile tightened, the first crack. "This is the recorded deed," my lawyer said, voice steady. "And this is the signature page. My client states she did not sign this. We are also submitting documentation of notice and access changes associated with the property paperless statements enabled, and mailing address updates, and a mortgage payoff statement request showing unilateral action." The judge asked my husband a simple question, the kind that makes liars hate court. "Did your wife sign this deed in the presence of a notary?" My husband tried to laugh lightly, like the question was silly. "Your Honor, of course," he said. "She's just upset now and doesn't remember." My lawyer slid forward a separate page, the notary stamp details enlarged, the commission number, the date and time. "The notary stamp indicates a specific time," she said. "We are requesting verification from the notary's journal." The judge's gaze sharpened. "Do you have the notary's journal entry?" My husband's face did something small but telling his confidence hunting for ground. "We can get it," he said quickly. "This is being blown out of proportion." The judge didn't look at him like a husband anymore. The judge looked at him like a party to a recorded instrument. "Mr. Last Name," the judge said, measured. "A recorded deed is not proportion. It is a legal document. If your wife did not sign, that is a serious allegation." My husband's mother shifted beside him, lips pressed tight. My husband pivoted to his favorite tactic, make me look unstable. "She's been spiraling," he said, voice soft as if he were worried about me. "She's been up all night on websites." The judge didn't react to spiraling. The judge reacted to evidence. "Why was the tax mailing address changed to a P.O. box not associated with the marital residence?" the judge asked. My husband hesitated. "For convenience," he said, "to keep things organized." "Organized for whom?" the judge asked, and my husband's throat bobbed. My lawyer then referenced the payoff request and the contact removal notice. "These changes," she said, "removed my client from access and redirected official communication." That context matters. For the first time, my husband looked less like the man who controlled the dinner table and more like someone realizing he'd stepped onto a stage where charm doesn't substitute for an answer. The judge issued instructions, procedural, firm, requiring document production, including the notary journal verification, and setting boundaries that made it clear this wasn't a private marital argument anymore. As we stood to leave, the clerk's keyboard clacked, recording the next steps like a metronome. In the hallway, my husband grabbed my elbow too tight, too familiar, and hissed, "You think you won?" I looked down at his hand until he let go. Then I said quietly, "No. I think you finally ran out of rooms where you can rewrite reality." His mother stared at me like I'd committed a social crime, but the courthouse didn't care about her stare. The courthouse cared about the stamped seal, the instrument number, the payoff trail, and the one question my husband couldn't charm his way around. Did I sign or didn't I? The first thing I did after the hearing wasn't dramatic. It was practical. I walked out of that courthouse into cold daylight, sat in my car, and called my lawyer before my hands had even stopped shaking. "What do I do today?" I asked. And she didn't answer with revenge or speeches. She answered with steps. Freeze credit. Change passwords. Move important documents out of the house. Notify the mortgage servicer and county recorder that there's a dispute pending. Stop letting anything run through him. It felt almost anticlimactic, how small the actions sounded compared to how big the betrayal felt. But that was the point. My husband had been winning with small moves. I was going to take the board back the same way. By the time I picked our son up from school, I'd opened a new bank account in my name only, rerouted my direct deposit, and turned on two-factor authentication on everything I could think of. I didn't do it with a trembling, apologetic energy. I did it with the calm I'd been borrowing from public records and stamped seals. When my son climbed into the car, he asked, "Did it go bad?" Like he'd been carrying that question around all day. I kept my eyes on the road and said, "It went real." He blinked, trying to understand. "Does that mean you're okay?" "It means I'm protecting us," I said, and I watched his shoulders drop by a fraction, like his body recognized safety before his mind could. That night, my husband came home with a new kind of silence, less swagger, more contained anger. He didn't try to charm, he didn't try to joke. He walked in, set his phone on the counter, and for once, he didn't flip it face down, because the gesture didn't buy him anything anymore. "You told strangers our business," he said, voice low. I looked at him and answered with the line that had become my anchor. "You put our business on record." He stepped forward like he wanted to reclaim the kitchen just by occupying space. "You're turning our kid against me," he said, and I felt the familiar trap open, make it about parenting so I'd shrink. But I didn't. "He heard you," I replied, and he told the truth. That's not turning him against you. That's reality catching up. The next week moved like a series of doors clicking into place, only this time, the clicks were mine. A certified envelope with the county seal arrived at the house and I intercepted it first. My name printed cleanly, no missing contents, no slit-open top. I held it for a long moment before opening it, not because I was afraid of paper anymore, but because I wanted to feel what it was like to receive something official that didn't pass through his hands. My lawyer filed what needed filing, sent letters that used calm language to describe ugly facts, and requested the notary journal. When the notary's office was contacted, my husband's confidence thinned visibly, like someone watching a spotlight swing toward them. He started insisting we work it out, started offering compromises that sounded generous until you heard the foundation. "I'll add you back later. I'll fix it after. I'll handle it." Every sentence still centered his control. I stopped negotiating my right to see my own life. At home, I put my important documents in a small fireproof box and moved it to a place he didn't know. I changed the Wi-Fi password before he could. The first time I typed the new password into the router settings, my hands shook not from fear of technology, but from the strange intimacy of taking back access. When the garage keypad beeped, it didn't twist my stomach the way it had. It became a sound I could answer. A few days later, with my lawyer's guidance and a temporary order that finally put boundaries into language my husband couldn't smooth talk around, I reprogrammed the garage code. The beep sounded exactly the same as always, but my body heard it differently. It was no longer a warning bell. It was confirmation. The fallout with his family came in the form of silence and rumors. My sister-in-law called once, voice tentative, and said, "He says you're doing a lot." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I offered one sentence, the only one that mattered. "There's a recorded deed with a signature that isn't mine." The pause on the line was long enough to feel like a door opening in someone else's mind. "Oh," she finally said, small and stunned. No apology, no dramatic support, just an "oh" that told me she'd stopped laughing at the dinner table story. My mother-in-law didn't call me at all. She sent a text that said, "You're destroying this family," and I stared at it until the anger cooled into something cleaner. I didn't respond. I didn't need her permission to protect myself. The hardest moment came quietly, late one night, when my son stood in the doorway of my room holding a glass of water like it was an excuse. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry I said it at dinner." My chest tightened. I sat up and held my arms out, and he climbed into them the way he hadn't since he was smaller. "Don't ever apologize for telling the truth," I said into his hair. He swallowed, voice muffled against my shoulder. "He looked so mad. That was his choice," I told him, "not yours." He was silent for a beat, then asked the question kids ask when they've seen too much. "Are we going to have to leave the house?" I pulled back enough to look at him. "No," I said, and this time the word wasn't hope. It was a plan. No one gets to erase you from your home with a story. In the weeks that followed, my husband stopped trying to perform ownership out loud. The phrase, "it's basically mine," disappeared, not because he'd grown wiser, but because it had finally met a room where it couldn't survive. Paper had done what politeness never could. And sometimes, when I'd set the table and the fork scraped softly against plates, I'd hear that first sharp click from the night everything changed, not as a warning, but as the moment my son reminded a whole room that I existed, that my consent mattered, and that truth doesn't require permission to be spoken.